I argued that revolutions are not just about technology, they're about power. The printing press wasn't revolutionary because it printed books. It was revolutionary because it changed who had access to knowledge. The information existed, but the transformation hadn't happened. And I think that was the moment that something clicked. We treated data as the product, but the product never was the data. The product was better decisions, and data don't make decisions, dialogue does. I've spent almost my entire career thinking about data, not because I particularly love spreadsheets, although I can get quite obsessive about them. I've spent my career thinking about data because I've spent my career thinking about one question. How do we make better public policy decisions? When I first started working in international development and cooperation, data meant evidence to me. I was a researcher. I wanted to know what was actually happening in the world. How much aid was flowing to different countries? Was it reaching poor people? Was it improving health, education, economic growth? I mean, just look at the book I wrote with Andy Sumner a few years ago called Aid, Growth and Poverty, and we tracked all the data linking those three things. Too often, arguments about development were ideological. People believed things because they'd always believed them. I thought data could help us escape that. I remember I was on a radio program once and a kind of right-wing MP was on saying how aid just didn't, work. And the data, it doesn't back that up. It doesn't necessarily particularly say that aid does work brilliantly in all ways, but it's complicated and the data needs to be understood in that way. Evidence wouldn't end political disagreement, but at least we could disagree about the same reality. So for years I thought of data primarily as evidence for better policy, evidence for better decisions. And I think that's true. But then in around 2012 or something, we as a community were building what became the SDGs. And something shifted. Everyone started talking about the data revolution, open data, big data, real-time data. There was a tremendous optimism that if we could simply make information better and freely available, development itself would be transformed. And I remember writing a piece for The Guardian that tried to push the conversation on in a slightly different direction. I argued that revolutions are not just about technology, they're about power. The printing press wasn't revolutionary because it printed books. It was revolutionary because it changed who had access to knowledge. The internet wasn't revolutionary because it connected computers. It was revolutionary because it connected people. Technology changes history because it redistributes power. So I started asking a different question. Not simply, what do the data tell us, but who gains power from these data? Where rapid poverty reduction has taken place in recent years, is better data behind it? Are we continuing to pollute our planet and make it more unequal because we lack data? Will more data about street children mean there are fewer of them? Will more data about communities being displaced from their land make it stop? Do we need to know precisely how many people are hungry and how hungry they are before making sure there is enough food for everybody? Of course, there are examples of better information and research leading to poverty reduction. Of course there are, but I was worried that lack of data was being touted as an excuse for failure, with the added bonus of being a nice earner for people like me in the research business calling for much more of it. A further concern is that you can come up with evidence for pretty much everything if you try hard enough. Working in research, I was constantly aware of the way that evidence can be manipulated to suit specific interests. The neoliberal age, overseen by the World Bank and IMF in the 1980s and 90s especially, for example, was nothing if not data heavy, as quantitative models were rolled out by top PhDs to prove beyond doubt that certain policies were the right ones. Except they weren't. Rather than evidence-based policy making, we so often have policy-based evidence making. As Benjamin Disraeli might have said, there are three types of lie: lies, damned lies, and data. Another great Englishman, Francis Bacon, coined the famous saying, knowledge is power. And that, I said in this piece, was a clue to what real data revolution could look like. In the era of big data, the likes of Google and and Amazon and the NSA are ever more powerful as they collect information on customers and citizens, the fact that this data exists is not in itself a public good. In fact, many people worry that it may be a negative aspect of our modern world. What matters is who has the information and how it is used. Who sets the questions? Who collects the data? And crucially, in whose hands does it end up? If we get it wrong, I said, and I think this has been borne out, we risk deepening inequality as more and better data bolsters the power of politicians and bureaucrats and businesses, while poor communities are left even further behind with others holding information about them that they themselves lack access to. Who gets a voice? Who gets to participate? Who gets to hold others to account? Who gets to make decisions? A non-revolution would be if a select group of nerds, business people or politicians end up knowing more about poor people and their problems. Data aren't neutral. Data change relationships, or at least they can. Then a few years later, I had the opportunity to lead an evaluation of the global aid transparency movement. And that movement was one of the biggest experiments the development community had ever undertaken in opening up information. The idea seemed beautifully simple. Publish data. People use the data, better decisions follow. So we spent months interviewing governments, donors, civil society organisations, researchers, journalists. The evaluation reached a rather uncomfortable conclusion. The aid transparency movement had largely succeeded and it had largely failed. It had transformed the supply of information. It had done much less to transform the way decisions were made. Technically, the movement had begun a remarkable journey. There were vastly better data than there had been a decade earlier. Publishing standards had improved enormously. Information that once barely existed was now available online. But when we asked who was actually using the data, the answers became much less encouraging. Government officials often preferred picking up the phone to donor representatives. Civil society organisations often didn't know the databases existed. Journalists rarely used them. The information existed, but the transformation hadn't happened. And I think that was the moment that something clicked. We treated data as the product, but the product never was the data. The product was better decisions. And data don't make decisions, dialogue does. I'd spent years thinking about data as evidence. Then I'd started thinking about data as power. Now I started thinking about data as dialogue. And this idea has actually now become part of the new strategy for the transparency movement. Think about your own life. Suppose I sent you a spreadsheet containing every financial decision my family has made over the past year. I've been perfectly transparent. But have I actually communicated very much? Perhaps not. Now imagine we sit down together over coffee. We look at exactly the same spreadsheet. You ask why we've spent more in one area, I explain. You challenge one of my assumptions, one of my data points. I suddenly realise something I'd missed. The data hasn't changed. The dialogue has created something new. And because the dialogue has changed, the next decision, the next public policy decision changes too. And that's what I mean by data as dialogue. The purpose of data isn't simply to inform. The purpose of data is to help people think together, to create shared understandings, to expose disagreement, to build trust, to improve judgment. And looking back, I realised that all three stages of my thinking belong together. Data as evidence, data as power, data as dialogue. Evidence tells us what is happening. Power determines who gets to act on that knowledge. Dialogue is one of the mechanisms through which evidence reshapes power and can change the world. And that's why I think this matters so much in the age of artificial intelligence. AI is in many ways the next chapter in this journey of data. First, AI will become the greatest engine of evidence humanity has ever created. It will help us understand the world better than ever before. It will uncover patterns we would never have seen. It will generate insights at extraordinary speed. And if my younger self believed in data as evidence, AI should make me more excited than ever. The second lesson I learned was that data is also about power. Who owns the data? Who trains the models? Whose knowledge is represented? Whose language? Whose values? Who gets access? Who gets left behind? Every technological revolution eventually becomes a question about power, and AI will be no different. And boy, are we seeing power differentials expanding at the moment. But my third lesson, I think, was perhaps the most important. We live in an increasingly divided world. Politics is becoming more polarized. Trust in institutions is declining. People inhabit different information ecosystems. Too often we don't simply disagree about what to do, we disagree about what's true. AI has the potential to make that better, but it also has the potential to make it a lot worse. It can personalize information so precisely that we each end up living in our own reality. It can reinforce our existing beliefs instead of challenging them. It can make it easier to win arguments than to seek understanding. And that's why dialogue becomes so valuable. Not always to reach agreement. Progress depends on disagreement as well. But disagreement within a shared commitment to evidence, a willingness to listen, to test our assumptions, to recognize that none of us sees the whole picture. The challenge of the AI age isn't simply to produce more intelligence, more data. It's to preserve and strengthen the institutions that allow intelligence to become collective judgment. Parliaments, citizens' assemblies, scientific communities, universities, the media at its best, international organizations, and countless conversations between people who begin from different places but are willing to reason together based on data. Perhaps that's the deepest lesson I've learned over 30 years. Evidence matters, power matters, but dialogue brings people together to make legitimate collective decisions. And in an age of artificial intelligence, that may be the most important human insight of all. So thanks for listening, and do listen to the other Future Cooperation podcasts that you will find on the site, and tune in for more and subscribe and click and bell and all those things. See you soon.